Good to see you all here.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here, and I'm very excited to be here for the first time and looking forward to the questions that you guys might have.
Hello, everybody. I'm Hal Hodson. I'm the Economist technology correspondent, and I think this is a very interesting question, and I have some thoughts about it, which I look forward to sharing with you. And you're in charge, right, Azam? Oh, we're doing our fortune cookies before the panel. Isn't that bad luck?
We can save it for once we have done the job, you know?
That's my view.
All right. Otherwise, we will be speaking with full mouths, and that's not the proper way how to do it. So as we are starting, I'll probably should give a short introduction of who I am. So I'm Christine, CEO of TechChill. TechChill is a non-profit foundation. We work with the startup ecosystem all across the Baltics and connecting it internationally. And big part of what we are doing is actually very directly related to building a community around what we are doing, marketing, communication, and also relations to media. So that's main reason why I'm here, and thank you, Azam, for inviting me here.
Thank you for joining us in the last minute. A little bit of background about myself. Oh, okay. I used to work for CNN for a year back in Iran. I'm also a contributor sometimes for technology outlets like STEM Magazine, Huffington Post. But currently I'm working in a project called Shivom, decentralized biotech and healthcare platform company that sequences DNA and assures the encrypted version of your DNA samples or data information. And
I'm just a journalist, and I work for perhaps the most analog journalism outlet left, which is The Economist. We make all of our money from selling people things made of paper, and so I definitely have thoughts about whether which is better, the great divide, analog or digital. We're going to pretend that there is a divide and have a big fight about it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. I'm sure that it's going to be a bloody fight. But I mean, the topic that we're actually covering is the analog storytelling in the digital world. I mean, since you are working in the best version of this, if you can share the challenges that you guys are facing right now in the digital world that is being kind of like disrupted by a lot of, I would say, platforms that are out there, and also adding to the version of technology.
Sure thing. So, I mean, there's lots of reasons why there's lots of challenges in what we're trying to do at the moment. One that comes up every single week is stop putting Trump in every single story. Stop making every single story about either Brexit or Trump. It might be a story about anything, satellite, internet, whatever, and there's always a Trump angle or a Brexit angle. And I think the reason that is because in the scrabble for people's attention, it's kind of like there's only two things on the planet left to talk about, at least in the UK and the United States. Well, no, I mean, we've put Trump on the cover so many times this year. Well, I mean, I don't want us to. I think there's far more interesting things in the world than what came out of Trump's mouth yesterday. And I think that by kowtowing to like just repeating extreme views and analyzing them, you just destroy discourse. I think what's much healthier is to talk about a diverse range of topics. Obviously. And I think that's a challenge with online, because I think the online ecosystem is optimized for the most extreme content possible, because that's what gets people to click. And so the whole environment is built to drive attention to digital advertising. That, for me, is the big problem.
And what do you think?
So in my job, I have to be working with very different types and forms of communication, including traditional media outlets, local and international ones, and also social media. And I think from what we've learned so far, the main return of investment in terms of getting the people's attention and actually getting them talking about what you're doing is actually targeting through the right channel, the right audience. And by the end of the day, that is going to be the thing that gives you the outcome. There will be occasions where traditional media publication on your table at home will give you a lot more reason to trust the article in itself than if you would just read it on Twitter.
So you guys are telling me the traditional model is much more effective than what we would actually see in digital?
I think it depends what you're trying to do.
If you can elaborate.
Well, so do you want to build a brand which consumers trust and which they can rely on over a period of time that is longer than it takes to flick through Twitter or click a link on Facebook?
You mean manipulating the story for just getting a click?
Oh no! I mean, what is your goal as an institution? So whether you're in marketing or journalism, you're trying to communicate something to a public, right?
But I mean, if you go to journalism,
Yeah.
just like telling the true story, getting the true story out. I mean, there is this discussion of fake news. Obviously, we hear that a lot since 2016, and I mean, everything is being labeled mostly as fake news, and there's a challenge in order to just verify: is it really true or is it fake? And how do I can trust that source?
Fake news has existed since advertising began. So the New York Sun was a newspaper in New York that existed sometime in the early 20th century, and in 1916 they started a new model whereby instead of selling their newspaper for 5 cents, they sold it for 1 cent, but with advertising in it. And it was a colossal success. They sold way more copies. Everybody wanted it. And they made piles and piles of money. And they also started putting fake stories in their newspaper. They ran a series of 6 stories about Martian or about aliens living on the moon, accompanied with these amazing old woodcut panels of like angels with wings flying around canyons on the moon. And that's pretty legit fake news. That's obviously not true,
but that's imagination.
Yeah, but it's not news.
Yeah, but it depends what
they were selling news.
They were saying that they were
saying this is a story. They were like, a respected scientist in the UK has found, that these things exist on the moon. So my only point with this is that fake news has existed as long as media.
Yes.
Rumor, these things are not exactly new. What I think is new goes back to my previous point, which is that the online ecosystem, the particularly targeted advertising, has created an environment which drives attention towards basically the wackiest shit you can find. And I think that's harmful in all kinds of ways.
But you also mentioned that it is also a challenge for you guys, you guys are following the traditional model. But, earlier that we were talking, you were saying that it depends on the business model.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean by...
Going back
by behavioral advertising.
Yeah.
The business model online is to capture as much attention as possible in pretty much any way. And one way to do that is to gather up a lot of data about me so that you know what I'm interested in, what I like, so that you can target me very specifically with advertising. And that has resulted in the entire web being built around this process because it's the only way anybody makes any money on the web. In contrast, like one of our... at The Economist, we basically have to trust that even though nobody, and it's just a fact that nobody ever reads stories about like famine in the Sudan. No one reads them. Maybe a couple of thousand people will read that story online. But we report those stories anyway because out of a sort of blind, ametricized trust that that's what our readers want. They want to know that if they read the Africa Middle East section, they will find some story on, Guinea's central bank and its latest troubles. And do those things do well on the internet? They definitely do not. Right. But if all we wanted to do was create content that does well on the internet, we'd all just go into pornography. So.
Well, if you're looking at perhaps the future of the traditional, storytelling, what would you think that it would actually be like? For example, right now it's a linear model, and digital storytelling is very exponential. Adding the new technologies, even like blockchain is helping in order to verify the sources, and also incentivizing the journalists at the same time being so much effective versus the traditional model. So how long do you think that it would sustain the traditional model? Is it just going to be there forever?
I'm definitely a bit of a blockchain skeptic. I don't think you can mechanize trust like that. Trust is inherently a human-to-human thing. I don't think just because I write it down in an immutable ledger somewhere, like all that means is that you just find a loophole in the ledger, which is exactly what happened with DAS. It's happened with all kinds of crypto projects. So I maintain belief in the the model which has always existed and I think always will exist as long as humans are humans, that you build a trusted relationship with another person and you work with them and you trust them to tell you the truth. And I think one of the problems is that trust is being eroded in mainstream media. I have this discussion with my mother all the time.
Of course, and that's usually a discussion that we have with different generations mostly. And I'm just thinking about the fact how the technology is actually changing how we are trusting different things. Like, for example, I'm trusting Google Maps that they will be taking me into the right direction. I'm not even doubting. Like, even if I will feel confused, I will definitely follow the route of Google Maps. So what if blockchain technology or some other technology reaches the point where we trust it more than human-to-human trust?
Digital technology essentially reaches that point. I mean, I think we do. I certainly trust Google to get me an answer about some arcane thing far more than I would trust, asking my brother or a friend, or probably even a librarian. But I do think it's good to remember the good things about the old ways of doing things, even if they are slowly dying.
How sustainable and effective is that traditional model?
It has not been sustainable. Well, so it depends what you mean by the traditional model. The reason that printed media, the reason that analog media in the US died is because it was entirely based on advertising. Time magazine, you get a subscription for $12. Well, but a few survivors, but in general, printed media in the US has been decimated. Oh yeah, but we don't just want tech billionaires owning it. Like, basically now, Steve Jobs' widow owns The Atlantic. Jeff Bezos owns The Washington Post. The New York Times, the only one that's not owned by a tech billionaire. And, local, more regional media has been completely destroyed. And online has not offered an answer for that. The only thing online's given us is Facebook.
But I think it's a little bit on that point, but I think it's also depending on the policies of these kind of like, obviously publications. For example, if they're towards left parties or right parties, and obviously they can sustain in between, or they can bring up more challenging stories and more challenging breaking news and so forth. If you remember that we had a kind of like a discussion before, media right now has been very much, media is a powerful source. That's why we have all these like money towards kind of like advertising, public relations, because of the power that you can actually not manipulate, but look at all the Facebook, crisis and saga that came up, right? The power of controlling sometimes minds with that kind of like news that it's not even verified if it's fake or true, right? So my point is maybe it's not just maybe it's about the politics of these kind of publications and
what, the ones that have gone out of business?
Yes.
I'm not aware of any swing in terms of left-leaning or right-leaning publications going out of business in the United States. As far as the ones that are currently doing the best, I would say are probably all left-leaning, right? Or at least I'm not sure about that. I think, from what I know, it seems much more likely that their local market was no longer interested enough in. They could get information from other places that were essentially free. And so, the biggest one isn't Facebook, it's Craigslist, because one of the main sustainers of local and regional newspapers in the United States was classified advertising. I'm selling my bed, or I've got a room in my house. And Craigslist just made all of that so much easier. So yeah.
But before you were working for New Scientist, what was the kind of like atmosphere there? They're still like printed magazine, right?
Yes, still a printed magazine. Perhaps a little bit more focused on trying to do well online, because it doesn't have as big of a readership as The Economist, and so its revenues there's not as much revenue to play with. You're not playing in a smaller box, so you have to try and do more innovative things. And it's having trouble. I think New Scientist also survived because it was niche. If you have a niche to operate in, you have a more clearly defined readership, and you can. It's easier to sell better advertising to those people than if you're just a general publication based in a city in the middle of the United States that has not necessarily anything specific. The specific thing was taken away from you by the internet, by Craigslist, and now you don't really have anything specific left.
Exactly. I'm coming back to the question of trusting analog media, and I'm really curious about the publications on Economist, the ones that you are mostly working with. Which of them do you think people actually are the most interested in, and what stories on the analog media are usually going the longest way in terms of the reach and engagement?
Do you mean stories that we do at The Economist?
Yeah.
I mean, anything to do with Trump. Like everyone else, we've had a significant Trump bump, which for anyone who doesn't know, that just means lots more people subscribing because they want to know what Trump's doing. It's the greatest show on earth, you know.
And you guys have stopped, covering that kind of like story. Just is not good, but it's.
We haven't stopped.
I know, but it's kind of like a red flag to even write.
No, it's just that there are more interesting things. It's just that there are other interesting things happening in the world apart from these massively polarizing events. You know, there's 7.5 billion people on the planet. Lots of them are doing interesting things that are nothing to do with Trump or Brexit. That's all.
Oh, you say so.
I mean, that's my belief. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Obviously, yes, but what I actually wanted to ask you, going back again to the traditional model of storytelling, do you think that perhaps, I know I had asked a question before, but it's going to be, disruption is something inevitable. We've seen that, for example, even like in the HD world, that how HD cameras came in, Kodak just went out of business, right? But now they had to kind of change their business model, as you were saying. Well, what would be, for example, the future of the industry for the journalists that are sticking to this business model? I know that you said that it might still be there, but again, the sustainability, the challenges with the trust and the source and the fake news. Again, it's going to rise up.
I will just jump in from my perspective as maybe a bit different generation, to kind of look into the possibility of who would be the target audience in actually really wanting to get this article to your house that you really, really trust. I think that is becoming more of a more exclusive thing, and it's going to lessen in terms of the numbers of people actually ready to pay for that, and then more people, and they are ready to pay more for that just to be sure that it's really a trustworthy source. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, so funny, I don't know why, but this has made me think of marriage. So marriage as an institution is declining. Fewer people get married, but those that do tend to be rich people. And so marriage is seen as a kind of almost, you've made it exclusive status. You've got to have the big fancy wedding. It's kind of an exclusive thing. You could kind of see subscribing to sort of elite print publications in the same way that, like, most people are never going to do it now. And most people are going to live by another set of norms. But there will always be, perhaps, I don't know whether or not most people will care, but there will always be a layer of society that thinks this is a cool thing to be subscribed to. I get a lot out of this. And I've always said, I don't think that The Economist journalism is particularly better than other places. I think what we did do better is market ourselves. Like the marketing campaign The Economist did in America in the early 2000s, long before my time, basically made every executive in America think that the best way to be smart and to get a job was to read The Economist. And that was genius. It's not necessarily true.
Obviously.
I'm actually still subscribed. I received the magazines, but I even don't read them. But exactly, I like the covers.
You don't read them. They are a measurement of how little you know about the world.
How much exactly?
That's
now
very
it's about the
smart.
information.
By the way, they are showing us the sign.
Yeah, 5. So I want to actually engage the audience and please ask questions or any comments or feedbacks or any challenging story of your own. Is that a raise?
So I have a question. How do you think we could educate people into thinking more broadly and into having more of an attention span and everything? And should it be done in the first place? Because it seems it's one of the main issues. currently?
I don't like this idea of educating people, this idea that what the way to solve this problem is media literacy. It feels very top-down to me. If only we could make the dumb masses understand our ways, then the world would be great, wouldn't it? But I know what you're saying, right? Like, I think what needs to be done is to show people the upside of developing a longer, like, doing deeper work, essentially. And I think actually in the modern economy, everybody can write back to emails and arrange meetings with Lorraine at 5 p.m. Not many people can actually sit down and deeply understand a topic and then communicate about it or, build a new product on top of that. And so I think it's in everybody's interest to pay close attention to things and not just to skim over the surface in outrage cycles that build into each other. It's in everybody's interest to dive a little deeper and get a little more rooted in what they're thinking about. So I would frame it slightly differently, not so much literacy and more incentivizing depth. By, I guess, changing our working environments would be one thing. Currently, working environments are very orientated around taking lots of meetings, sending lots of emails, getting things done, ticking things off the to-do list. You could also think about changing the design of the software that we all live with that tends to be the sort of substrate on which we skitter across the surface. There's the sort of, what is it, time well spent initiative that ex-Google engineer Tristan something is doing, and where you turn your phone to grayscale and you delete all your social media apps. I think there is a movement building, and I think supporting things like that, even if they're not quite right, but if they're asking the right questions, maybe not providing exactly the right answers, I think that's the way to go.
Or is it the time for the fortune cookie?
It's fortune cookie time.
This is a very strange conference ritual. I've never been to a conference.
Yeah, but I don't mind. It's
No.
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 Negative.
Please open the fortune cookie.
Dogecoin. Mine says, as long as you're going to be thinking anyway, think big. Hashtag DFF Festival.
nice.
It's your third one today.
My third fortune. That's 3 fortunes in one day.
Yeah. Well, that's a lot. That's a lot. So mine is anything that is measured and watched improves.
Like media and marketing activities.
Obviously, not traditional model though.
Yeah.
You're still like in that world. Move on. Come to blockchain sometimes.
And mine is very related to blockchain, probably.
Nice.
Don't limit yourself. Many people limit themselves to what they think they can do. You can do as far as your mind lets you. That's for you, and that's for everyone else here. Thank you so much for joining. It was a very nice discussion.
Thank you. Thanks.